Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this blizzard closure day in Washington, D.C. What a great turnout we have. I'm Patrick Cronin of the Asia Program of the Center for a New American Security, and in partnership with the U.S. Studies Center at the University of Sydney, and as part of the 2016 Good Day USA program, it is a great honor to be hosting the Honorable Julie Bishop, the brilliant Foreign Minister of Australia. Let me also extend a warm welcome to the former Australian Treasurer and Member of Parliament, and now Ambassador to the United States, Joe Hockey, who replacing an old friend, Kim Beazley, as the Ambassador to the United States. And as an avid fan of the North Sydney Bears Rugby Club, I think Joe Hockey is ready for the scrum of our no-holds-barred election season in 2016. So welcome, Ambassador. Let me also pay homage to the 26th day of January, Australia Day. While our record snowstorm has paralyzed much of the East Coast, the challenge it has posed pales in comparison to what Arthur Phillip faced when he and his first fleet of 11 convict ships arrived at Sydney Cove 228 years ago. The misery that penal colony endured surely made it doubtful that Australia would emerge as one of the most advanced economies of the world, fifth largest in per capita income. So we all celebrate Australia's remarkable achievements on this landmark day. Turning back to the distinguished keynote speaker, the Honorable Julie Bishop hails from Perth in Western Australia, a state the size of Texas and Alaska combined. It's huge. She studied at the University of Adelaide and started her career as a successful commercial litigator. She attended Harvard Business School before being elected as only the fourth ever member of Parliament for Curtin, an electorate established in 1949 and named for the wartime Prime Minister John Curtin. And by the way, it was 75 years ago this December, I believe, when John Curtin and FDR established the first direct radio telegraph link between our two countries. And that was sort of foreshadowing the whole strength of a close alliance and the Five Eyes partnership as well that would follow. If our alliance is close, it is because of leaders like Julie Bishop. She first served as cabinet member in the Howard government. She's deputy leader of the Liberal Party. This is at least her 10th visit to the United States, and she was sworn in as foreign minister in September 2013. So please join me in welcoming Australia's illustrious foreign minister, the Honorable Julie Bishop.
Thank you, Patrick, for the introduction. I acknowledge the Honourable Michelle Florno, and what a warm welcome it is here in Washington today. I'm delighted to see my buddy, Ambassador Joe Hockey here. He's settling in, and I noted that he's been tweeting photos of the snow outside the residence because his children have never seen snow. And I love the selfie that you called a snelfie, or do they call them snowfies? There you go. But I am confident that my friend Joe Hockey will follow in the fine tradition of all Australian ambassadors to the United States, particularly Kim Beazley, a great friend of the United States, in enhancing our already deep and quite remarkable partnership. It's a real pleasure to be here in Washington on this auspicious day, for as Patrick noted, 26th of January marks Australia Day. And my thanks to the United States Studies Center and the Center for New American Security for co-hosting this event, which has become an annual fixture in our public diplomacy program we call G'day USA. It's particularly fitting to celebrate Australia Day here in Washington, D.C. because it could be argued that this city's namesake, George Washington, created Australia. Were it not for his military achievements in your War of Independence, depriving Britain of the prison hulks in Georgia and North Carolina, and the subsequent overcrowding of the jails back in Britain, well, Britain wouldn't have been able to look elsewhere to accommodate those of its criminal class. Thus, the convict colony of New South Wales was established on the 26th of January, 1788. We too are the beneficiaries of the Boston Tea Party. On each occasion that I've visited the United States, in fact, Patrick, this is my 11th visit since becoming Foreign Minister just over 2 years ago, I'm reminded of the strong bond between our two countries. In fact, ours is an extraordinary alliance, evidenced by the depth of our practical cooperation and in the ideals and the values that we share. Our shared commitment to freedom and liberal democratic principles has shaped both our countries and how we view and react to global challenges. Today, I'll specifically speak about the geostrategic challenges in our region, which I call the Indo-Pacific, bound as we are by two vast oceans, the Indian and the Pacific, and how we respond through the use of hard and soft power. This region takes in an arc of nations from India and Pakistan to the three Asian giants of Japan, China and South Korea, through to Southeast Asia, Indonesia, the South Pacific and all countries between. The shift of the world's economic centre of gravity from west to east is already well underway. Our region will be of immense and enduring importance to global stability and prosperity. By 2030, Asia will account for over 1/3 of the global economic output, rising to over 1/2 by 2050. This represents a tremendous opportunity for countries like the United States and Australia with our deep links into the region. However, the years ahead will bring greater challenges than even those of the past few decades, and it's the capacity of the region to reap the benefits of greater wealth will depend on its ability to grow peacefully and manage effectively the emerging and inevitable tensions. Today, competing maritime claims, resources competition, and historically based matters of sovereign pride all factor into the region's stability. Tensions in the South China Sea are a significant cause of concern, not only because of its vital economic significance. More than US $5 trillion of world trade and about 1/3 of the world's maritime traded oil pass through the South China Sea every year. Historically, rising national wealth leads to increasing expenditure on military capabilities. Between 2004 and 2014, military spending in southern, eastern and northern Asia, and I'm excluding Central Asia, rose almost 75% in real terms. And this reflects national concerns about the strategic outlook for the region and an understandable desire amongst the countries of the region to help shape the strategic environment through stronger defence capabilities. Let me share with you Australia's perspective of our region in the context of historical and current relationships, rising defence spending and the geostrategic implications for the region and thus the globe. To understand Asia today, we need to have an understanding of its past. The region is no stranger to periods of intense conflict, political unrest and strategic instability. In the 13th century, as the Fourth Crusade began in Europe, Genghis Khan and his Mongol army successfully invaded China and Korea and might well have conquered Japan too, had it not been for the bad weather. In the past 2,000 years, China has experienced numerous civil wars. It's estimated that China's 3 most lethal civil wars, the Three Kingdoms War in 220 to 280 AD, resulting in 40 million deaths, the An Lushan Rebellion of 755 to 763 AD, resulting in a further 36 million deaths, and the Taiping Rebellion of 1850 to 1884, with estimates of those killed ranging between 20 and 100 million, they are collectively responsible for the deaths of as many as 176 million people. On a completely different scale, Americans are familiar with the tragic human toll of a civil war. However, let me put that in context. A war fought at around the same time as your civil war in the 1860s, China's Taiping Rebellion, probably resulted in about 100 times more casualties than the American Civil War. In the last century, in the late 1930s and early 1940s, the Sino-Japanese War resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people. Such history continues to be reflected in the tensions between Korea, China and Japan 70 years on. History and how it's recorded is a powerful influence on how countries behave towards each other. The Second World War has been viewed as a Western European conflict, the seeds of which lay very much in the fallout from the First World War. However, it was also an Asian and Pacific conflict, triggered by tensions and rivalries within Asia, many of which remain today. While military leaders in Europe may have discussed the Pacific theatre of World War II, in Asia the war was viewed primarily through the prism of overturning Japanese militarism and colonisation, and the end of that war, through the US deployment of nuclear weapons against Japan, has resonated throughout the decades. In the case of Vietnam, while there were 5 wars in the 20th century, the most well-known and lethal conflict ended in 1975, just 40 years ago. In Myanmar, the Karen National Liberation Army has been fighting Burma's central government for the past 60 years, making this the world's longest-running contemporary civil war. And although the Korean War lasted from 1950 to 1953, the 2 states on the Korean peninsula remain technically at war, with North Korea's nuclear ambitions an additional element for deep concern, demonstrated by another nuclear test only 3 weeks ago. European colonialism added a further layer of strategic complexity. The ASEAN grouping came into being in part as an Asian organisation united against colonialism. So it's in the context of this complex and volatile history that we must, at least in part, consider the rising military spending across Asia. In terms of sheer hard power, consider the following. In 2012, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute reported that the volume of arms transfers into Southeast Asia had grown by 200% since the end of the Vietnam War, with naval weapons forming the bulk of purchases. China is now the world's second largest military spender after the United States. Recent estimates are that China's total military expenditure in 2014 was US $216 billion, an increase in real terms of 200% since 2005. India is expected to spend US $100 billion over the next decade on defence modernisation, including 8 new maritime patrol planes, 6 indigenously built conventional submarines and a second indigenously built aircraft carrier. Russia is talking up its so-called pivot to Asia. On current planning, a large-scale revamp of its Pacific fleet will see it grow from Russia's smallest to its largest naval deployment over the next decade. As part of an overall military build-up to cost around US $600 billion, this fleet will have new ballistic missile submarines, attack submarines and upgrades to its surface fleet. Vietnam boosted its military spending by over 100% in real terms between 2004 and 2014, the largest increase among Southeast Asian countries. This is being played out across Asia to a varying degree, and so together with rising territorial tensions, particularly in the South China Sea, this increase has led to speculation that we are witnessing an arms race in Asia. While it's prudent to take a clear-eyed view of developments, it would be wrong to assume that we are headed for an inevitable regional conflict. First, while countries in the region are spending more on military and defence in real terms, I believe that is as much a function of economic growth as it is about strategic hedging. Economic integration is a powerful buffer against conflict. As liberal theorist and political economist Frederick Bastiat noted back in the 19th century, when goods cannot cross borders, armies will. In the past 20 years, China and India have quadrupled their share of the global economy. A report released in early 2015 by PricewaterhouseCoopers projects that Indonesia's economy in 2030 will be larger than the United Kingdom or France, currently the 5th and 6th largest global economies. ASEAN's combined economy quadrupled in size from 2000, and if it were treated as a single economic entity, its GDP in 2014 would have sat between France at 6th place and Brazil in 7th. Within a few years, barring some kind of security disaster, Asia will not only be the world's largest producer of goods and services, but it will be the world's largest consumer of them. So when we consider military spending as a proportion of GDP for countries across the region, it's not that straightforward, as there has actually been a downward trend over the past 40 years. Let me take some examples. In 1974, South Korea spent 4.3% of its GDP on military. In 2014, it was 2.6%, despite regular provocations from the north. Thailand spent 2.7% in 74. 40 years later, this had almost halved to 1.5%. Japan consistently spends 1% or less on its GDP on military, and Singapore has the most modern military in Southeast Asia, but it reduced military spending as a share of GDP between 1974 and 2014 from 5.2 to 3.3%. These figures compare to US spending on military, which decreased from 6.1% of GDP in 1974 to 3.5% 40 years later. Australia's military spending followed a similar trend from 2.7% in 74 to 1.8% in 2014. Chinese defence spending, which accounted for half of Asia's total spend in 2014, was still less than 1/3 of US military spending that year. Secondly, there are upsides to more modern, sophisticated militaries. It's not just about buying bigger bombs or smarter delivery systems. Much of what we're seeing is a professionalisation of national defence and vastly improved capacity for different military forces to communicate. Through economic growth, countries in the region are able to better address maintenance and logistics and increase capability. Capable militaries can add to regional stability, with countries better able to manage security challenges, reducing the need for compulsion for external intervention. The military is often the first responder to the natural disasters that regularly afflict nations on our so-called rim of fire. Military modernisation also offers enhanced opportunities for cooperation on military and strategic matters between states, the importance of which cannot be overstated. Japan's recent announcements are examples, the greater defence cooperation with the United Kingdom and developments in the United States and Vietnamese military cooperation. While some relationships are still shaped by their historical context and are a long way from being solved, there have been positive developments. The recent progress by Japan and Korea in trying to resolve the very difficult and sensitive issue of comfort women is one example. Another is the 6th trilateral summit between China, Japan and South Korea late last year, in which leaders vowed to strengthen ties between the North Asian economic powerhouses. Nurturing this cooperation and dialogue is essential to regional and global stability. That stability and prosperity depends a great deal on how relationships between major powers evolve, in particular among China, India, Japan, and the United States. Institutions like the East Asia Summit will, of course, continue to be important as critical places for Asian nations to discuss thorny issues and to resolve them collaboratively. Australia and the United States have been working with regional partners to support the East Asia Summit as an institution that can help the region deal seriously with its strategic challenges. The 2015 East Asia Summit leaders issued an unprecedented number of statements on key security issues, including countering violent extremism, maritime security, cyber security, health security. Other regional bodies are also increasingly important, and new partnerships and collaborations are emerging, even some unlikely ones, through the new grouping of MICTA. First formed in 2013, Australia collaborates with Mexico, Indonesia, Korea and Turkey on a range of regional and global issues, including counterterrorism, climate change, and the promotion of more open trade. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is a further example of the benefits to come from intra-regional partnerships. And I do digress, but the Australian government urges Congress to look favourably on ratifying this agreement. Thank you. Indeed, a successful TPP will be crucial to establishing a prosperous Indo-Pacific economic order into the future. And this highlights how the region today is far more interdependent than it has been in the past. Like Australia, the United States is of course no stranger to Asia. For decades, the US has provided a security guarantee in this region, which has contributed to its economic growth. The United States was instrumental in contributing to efforts to rebuild the region post-World War II and continues to assist countries across the Indo-Pacific through support for governance, humanitarian assistance and infrastructure. Over more recent times, we've seen the reinvigorated US engagement in the region through the rebalance to Asia. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, said in 2011 that building the kind of institutional bridges with Asia that the United States had in place with Europe was paramount. Australia is not the only country with strong links to or knowledge of the region. However, I believe we do offer a different perspective. Over the years, Australia has positioned itself as a reliable partner in Asia. For example, supporting the campaign for the independence of our nearest Asian neighbour, Indonesia. In fact, we remained steadfast in our support for its hard-fought independence from the Dutch in the 1940s. So we have strong economic, defence and political ties and generations of personal ties with Indonesia. We work closely together on shared strategic and security issues, counter-terrorism, foreign terrorist fighters, maritime security and defence. We have, in fact, developed real military cooperation with a number of countries in our region, including China. Such cooperation is an important confidence-building measure and adds to regional stability. While China's military spending has attracted considerable attention, for many years our bilateral defence engagement with China has included strategic dialogue, practical cooperation activities and exercises, and personnel training. We hosted Exercise Kawari, the first trilateral exercise between the Defence Forces of Australia, China and the United States. In November last year, our Navy conducted a port visit and naval exercise with the Chinese Navy in southern China. China worked with Australia and other nations in contributing military assets to the search for missing flight MH370 in the Indian Ocean. Together with the United States, we also participate in a range of multilateral exercises that include China through various ASEAN meetings. India is also an increasingly important security partner for us. We held the first of what will be ongoing bilateral maritime exercises with India last September in the Bay of Bengal with ships, submarines and planes from both countries. We're also building new arrangements that link India with other key Asian partners. Last June, foreign departmental secretaries from India, Australia and Japan met in a new format for the first time to compare notes on the strategic challenges we face. They'll meet again in Japan next month. We have increasingly substantive defence cooperation with Vietnam, including engagement on issues such as maritime security, counter-terrorism and peacekeeping. This cooperation with Vietnam is underpinned by its emergence as a key player in the regional economy. It is our fastest growing trading partner in ASEAN and has been for the past decade. I'm going through this list to demonstrate the depth of the cooperation that we will hopefully be able to draw upon should the improbable become the probable, that is, a major conflict in our region. Australia's history in the Indo-Pacific is in no small part defined by our geographic proximity and our great multicultural society. More than 1 in 4 Australians was born overseas, more than 40% have a parent or parents who were born overseas. Our 24 million people include over 2 million Australians born in Asia. Our largest source countries for migration today are India and China, with 7 of our top 10 migration source countries in Asia. Nearly 1.5 million Australians are fluent in one or more Asian languages. In the 1970s, Australia became home to thousands of Vietnamese refugees fleeing war and hardship in their own country. Today, our vibrant Australian Vietnamese community numbers now in the hundreds of thousands. We have firm historical links with key Asian neighbours, including Indonesia and Malaysia, and we are forging new ones through trade and investment links, development assistance, tourism and education. In terms of soft power diplomacy, the United States and Australia are effective practitioners. A report by Portland Communications, republished by the World Economic Forum last year, found Australia to be the 6th most effective user of soft power globally, with the United States ranked 3rd. Australia doesn't underestimate the impact of what Professor Joseph Nye described as soft power diplomacy, the power to attract, to get others to what you want, to frame the issues, the agenda. As he said, that attractiveness stems from credibility and legitimacy, and that power in an information age will come not just from strong hard power, but from strong sharing. As we share with others, we develop common outlooks and approaches that improve our ability to deal with new challenges. I believe it's our commitment to freedom and open societies that make both our nations so attractive as countries with which to engage. Free trade and open markets are also vital. Last year, Australia and China signed an historic free trade agreement, building on our earlier trade agreements with Japan and South Korea. Together, these 3 markets account for almost 40% of Australia's total trade and almost half of our total exports. These complement free trade agreements we already have in place with Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and with ASEAN. This year, we're working on trade agreements with Indonesia, our 12th largest trading partner, and with India. And of course, we're a founding member of the 12-state Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're investing in the future of our engagement in the region by supporting thousands of young Australian students to live, study, and work in the countries of our region, at their universities, in their workplaces, in their businesses. Through this educational exchange, our new Colombo plan is forging deep community connections in 38 countries in our region and complements the hundreds of thousands of students from the region coming to Australia to study every year. In fact, in 2014, 75% of all international students studying in Australia were from Asia, almost 350,000 in total. Last Friday in New York, I declared Australia to be the world's lifestyle superpower. This is thank you again. This is already appreciated by the citizens of our region as we attract an increasing number of Asian tourists. Indeed, last year, Asian tourists collectively spent $17.7 billion, more than half of the total tourism expenditure by all international visitors to Australia. Last year, 1 million Chinese tourists came to Australia. So from sending koalas to Singapore as a 50th anniversary of its independence gift via Qantas's new koala class, to showcasing Australian fashion designers using our superfine wool in India, to expanding our diplomatic footprint with new posts in Ulaanbaatar, Phuket, Makassar and in PNG, to refocusing our foreign aid expenditure to primarily the Indo-Pacific, Australia is using all its diplomatic assets and resources, our hard and soft power, capabilities and influence to build a stronger, connected and more prosperous region. The United States remains our indispensable partner in this shared pursuit. Thank you.
To sit down and join me for a bit of a fireside chat. Since it's a snowy day, we don't have the fire, but you all can use your imagination. Thank you for such a strategic tour of the region and such an insightful set of remarks. you talked about the deep trade relations that Australia has with China. And I know that Australia, and you in particular, are quite a keen observer of what's going on in China. And we've seen in its external behavior, China sort of really coming into its own in terms of asserting its influence, whether it's in East and South China Sea, whether it's institutionally in creating the new AIIB and other things. But we've also seen some signs of internal challenges, economic adjustments, some of the recent market fluctuations. How do you see the internal situation in China, and how do you think that is going to affect China's external behavior in the region?
Well, you've raised a number of very interesting points there. As China grows in economic and strategic power, it's inevitable that it will seek to influence through institutions like the AIIB and through regional forums and through its pursuit of its own free trade agreements. RCEP being a counter, if you like, to TPP, although I would like to see RCEP and TPP join forces to create what APEC dreamed of, and that is a true free trade agreement across the Asia Pacific. China is obviously and has always faced the massive challenges of a huge continent and a massive population and borders with some nations who have challenged their sovereignty. And maintaining internal stability is the raison d'etre of the Chinese Communist Party. And maintaining the Chinese Communist Party in power is seen as the key to that. So you have to see what China does externally and internally through that prism. In the South China Sea, the tensions are somewhat inevitable given China's view of history and the view that other countries take of their territorial rights. And a very wise person spoke to me yesterday about the need to separate China's claims for sovereignty with the maritime disputes between the various countries. And I think there's some truth in that, that one could negotiate with China as long as one recognised that they have a particular historical perspective of what is their territory and their sovereignty. The slowing economic growth is not only a challenge for China, but for the 120 countries that claim China as their largest two-way trading partner, or at least merchandise trading partner. So any slowing of growth in China impacts on our region, impacts on the world. Australia feels it very keenly, for much of our economic growth in recent times has been built on the back of China's economic growth. Indeed, we are enjoying the 24th consecutive year of uninterrupted economic growth. And we got through the global financial crisis much because of China's continuing demand for our commodities. So just putting that in context, China will do what it takes to maintain internal stability. I believe what it fears most is a level of civil unrest that we've seen elsewhere in the world, and of course in North Africa and the Middle East has led to some pretty disastrous consequences. So China will maintain a very strong hand over any form of disruption to what it sees as the peace, order and good government of China. Hence our concerns about their responses to freedom of speech and human rights. It's all part of China maintaining a very firm hold over its internal stability.
Thank you. I thought you made a really important point about, even at a time where competition may be increasing, conflict is not inevitable. So I wanted to focus a little bit more deeply on South China Sea in particular. We obviously see the continued land reclamation, island building, if you will, from China. Recently, the United States resumed its freedom of navigation operations, as did, I believe, Australia, in terms of trying to reinforce the rules-based international order. But on the horizon, we see things like the Philippines Arbitration case, which is likely to reach some conclusion in May. You've just seen a little bit to the north the Taiwanese elections and a new party elected there that has some in Beijing quite anxious. So there are some things on the horizon that could sort of add a spark or some tension to the mix. Are there specific steps that you think we should be taking, either individually or together, to try to, reduce risk, build confidence, but also, deter Chinese assertiveness that would be, potentially even aggressive in nature?
The land reclamation has taken place. The building of artificial reefs has already occurred. What we can do is work with the ASEAN countries, a number of whom are claimants to the territorial disputes, to put in place a code of conduct for behaviour of nations in the South China Sea, embracing the international norms that we hold dear, that is freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. Australia has always maintained our right to sail, fly in international waters and skies, and will continue to do so. The issue of whether an artificial reef creates some kind of economic or territorial right will be assessed again in the Philippines Arbitration case. I point out that China has not submitted to its jurisdiction, but nevertheless that case has been heard. The Philippines gave evidence, gave its case as to why it believed that it had a territorial claim over that part of the East China Seas, if you like. And I think that decision will be extremely important. I'm not suggesting that Japan will necessarily publicly admit that it is bound by it. In fact, I don't expect it will. But nevertheless, it will be a statement of an international principle that I believe will be embraced and upheld by all other nations with claims or interests in the region. Australia is not a claimant, and we don't take sides in the competing territorial claims. We believe that's a matter of negotiation or arbitration, but we do support the United States' view of the inherent right for freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. We want to see a de-escalation of tensions in the region. We would hate for there to be some kind of miscalculation that could lead to conflict, and we believe that a code of conduct, once reclamation, we accept that reclamation has occurred and has ceased, and we take at face value President Xi's statement that they do not intend to militarise the islands. I think we should continue to remind China of his statement. Then hopefully this can all be resolved peacefully. But let's face it, there are territorial claims and maritime claims going back centuries that are still unresolved. What we must ensure is that norms of behaviour don't lead to conflict.
Thank you. So if we could turn to the Middle East for just a second and the counter-ISIS fight. I think there's evidence that I think the coalition is stepping up its efforts. Certainly after Paris, after San Bernardino, there's more domestic political support here to get tougher on ISIS. And yet there's still a debate about what that really means, what the right strategy is, what could be most effective in terms of how we redouble our efforts. Australia's been a frontline partner in this. You've been affected by it directly at home. How do you think about the ISIS campaign and how we go forward in the next year? What more can and should we be doing?
Well, first we have to ensure that there are strong national governments in place and that the sovereignty of the nations of the Middle East is maintained. We are in Iraq with the consent of an invitation of the Iraqi government, and we are there to assist the Iraqi government build up its defence forces and its capabilities and capacity to take back the land that has been claimed by ISIL or ISIS and defend its own people. In Syria, there is a civil war with so many layers of complexity and now so many external players that surely one of our priorities must be to get a political solution of some form in Syria so that the attention of all these players can be directed to the enemy within, which is ISIL, likewise has declared a caliphate and has challenged Syria's sovereignty. So those two issues, that is building a strong national government in Syria and maintaining one in Iraq, must be at the beginning of our concerns. In the meantime, we obviously have to continue to fight against a terrorist organisation, the brutality and violence, the likes of which we've not seen before. It's positively medieval in its approach. It respects no boundaries, no government, no sovereignty, human life. It is truly appalling. Australia is the second largest military contributor to the coalition efforts on the ground in Iraq. We are taking part in the airstrikes over Syria on the basis of collective self-defence, that in supporting Iraq we're able to attack ISIL as it moves from Iraq into Syria and back again. The political solution has taken a turn, I think, with the fact that the United Nations de Mistura, he has now called for a meeting of all of the opposition and government groups in Syria, apart from the terrorists, but he's called for a meeting of them all, which is scheduled to occur on the 29th of January. So if there is able to be some sort of collaboration in Syria, then we can turn everybody's attention to fighting this terrorist organisation. Of course, Russia and Iran's interventions have made it even more complex, but we have to deal with it. It's a reality. We have to deal with it. And so, as unlikely as it might be, a number of countries who would not otherwise cooperate militarily may well need to do so in order to secure a defeat of this terrorist organisation. For defeat it we must.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to all of you to ask a question, so be thinking about what you'd like to ask Minister Bishop. As you know, we are going through a rather unusual and fairly raucous election campaign here in the United States, which I have given up trying to explain to my non-US counterparts. But you know, as in any campaign season and any transition, it's really important that there are certain things that we keep out of the political maelstrom. We have a very deep and rich alliance, and there are a number of common initiatives and efforts that I would think we would want to see continue from this administration to the next, whatever their political stripes. As you look at this unusual American election season, are there particular areas where you would like to suggest that your American counterparts take care that there's certain babies we don't want to throw out with the bathwater, there are certain initiatives that we don't want to sort of politicize and disrupt? Are there things that you want to, anything you want to advise us in this season to make sure we sort of stay on track without asking you to pick between Trump or Cruz or Sanders?
Well, far be it from me to advise the American people on who they should elect as their president, or indeed to advise any of the potential candidates. Who knows, we may not have seen all the candidates come to the floor just yet. So, I have followed the debates, both the Democrat and the Republican debates. I have followed the pronouncements and the policy positions of a number of the likely candidates. And I believe that Australia will continue to be able to say, hand on heart, that we will be able to work effectively with whomever the American people, in their wisdom, choose to be the President of the United States. Whoever is in power in Canberra, or whoever is in power in Washington, has a deep understanding of the significance of this alliance. This room knows that Australia has stood with the United States in every single major conflict in which the United States has been involved throughout the 20th and 21st century. We are the only nation to have been in every single major conflict with you. And that is well understood, I believe, by those who are running for office, and most certainly understood on the Hill. So while policy positions will differ, I think, as in Australia, foreign policy actually is non-partisan at its most fundamental. And in that, I see an ongoing appreciation of the depth of the alliance and how we work together to influence others to our view of the world. That hasn't given you a headline, has it?
No, I was just going to say, your very skillful answer just demonstrated why you are Australia's top diplomat. So we're going to open it up for questions. When I call on you, please let us know who you are and do ask a question, please. Any takers? Yes, Stanley.
Hi, Stanley Roth, Calling Company. You referred in your remarks, I think, to an underlying tension between wanting to keep tensions managed and reduce them in the South China Sea and maritime disputes, but also a need to defer actions if necessary and create some boundaries. I can't say that I have much optimism about the code of conduct, given that it's been going on for well over a decade. But what I want to do is get your assessment of whether the internal troubles in China, the weakening of the economy, in particular some of the other labor strikes and the like, a whole series of developments, currency, stock market, are likely to push China in a more nationalistic direction on the foreign policy, or likely to push it into more conciliatory, or is this one of those your guess is as good as mine situations?
Well, thanks for the question, Stanley. I appreciate what you say about the code of conduct because it has been the subject of discussion for a very long time, but we're now getting to a point where the International Court of Justice will hand down a ruling on the Philippines Arbitration case. That will, I think, give substance to the views that a number of countries have held about the international norms that should dictate what goes on in the South China Sea. I believe that leadership from the United States is absolutely essential. Not one nation with whom I have discussed American leadership has called for less US leadership in the region. They're calling for more. Maybe that's a piece of advice I should pass on to the...
It's a good one.
Yeah. And so the United States standing up for its belief and principles in international law is very important. This will also be important in the context of any further air defence identification zone. On the last time that one was unilaterally declared, Australia and the United States made a very strong stand, and I think that was important. There is a point where I think the South China Sea tensions will dissipate. As to your question about what's going on inside China, well, China wouldn't be the first country to use military adventures or other distractions to deflect focus on economic or demographic challenges. Russia is doing that rather well at present. In the case of China, I think we have to support its public statements that it wishes to rise peacefully. And that's why we are cooperating so deeply with China on naval exercises, on trilateral exercises with the United States. The more we engage, the closer we become, the more we understand each other. And I would hope that China would not then see the need to do what others have done, and that is become more aggressively nationalistic in the face of internal challenges.
Great. Yes, sir. Back here.
Thank you very much. My name is Dong Huiyu with China Review News Agency of Hong Kong. And thank you, Minister. It was reported by an Australian media yesterday that
It must be true.
It's not true? Do you know what I would like to ask?
I have no idea what you're about to say. I'm just making a statement of principle.
No, let me finish my question.
Please.
Yeah. It was reported by the media that the Australia government is considering conducting the freedom of navigation military exercise in the South China Sea. So would you like to confirm that? And what factor would you like to consider before making decision? Thank you.
I think I just gave the answer, didn't I? Irony is a great thing in Australian politics. The Australian media can report all sorts of things. The fact is we already undertake exercises in the South China Sea. We already pass through the South China Sea. A substantial amount of our trade is via the South China Sea. So we are already exercising our right to traverse the South China Sea in accordance with international law. We do it now, we've been doing it, we'll continue to do it. So while it might have made the front page of a newspaper in Australia, after all, it was Australia Day. It's a slow news day for some. But of course, Australia always acts within the confines and the constraints of international law, and we will continue to do that in the South China Sea.
Great. Thank you. Yes, right here, the gentleman with his hand up.
Hi, Minister. John Keogh from the Australian Financial Review, just following up my colleague's question on that. Isn't the point around that issue...
Oh, now
though,
you tell me there are members of the Australian media here.
Isn't the point around that issue around freedom of navigation in the South China Sea what shape or form you or the Americans may choose to take that in? For example, the Americans recently went within 12 nautical miles. I think Australia's approach in the past has been a less poke the bear kind of attitude. And yes, you have done freedom of navigation exercises, but would you consider, as has been reported, doing a slightly more parochial one, such as the Americans recently did within 12 nautical miles of land that China deems sovereign to itself?
This is the question being considered, or one of the questions being considered by the Philippines Arbitration. And in my mind, that arbitration will settle once and for all this question of whether or not an artificial reef can create some kind of 12 nautical mile buffer. Now, our belief is it does not, as a matter of international law, but let's see what the ICJ has to say in the Philippines Arbitration. So Australia will continue to traverse the South China Sea in accordance with our understanding of international law. The question of the legitimacy of making a claim as a result of an artificial reef or a below water structure will be determined by the Philippines arbitration case. That's likely to be a judgment handed down pretty shortly.
Yes, right here.
Thank you. Brian Harding from the Center for American Progress here in DC. So it seems to me that over the last 6 or 7 years that the U.S.-Australia alliance has really rebalanced, so to speak, to the Asia-Pacific region, sort of aligned with how the United States has been thinking about foreign policy until the recent anti-ISIS campaign. I was curious if you could just share a few thoughts on what the ideal orientation of the U.S.-Australia alliance should be. Should it be focused on the Asia-Pacific region, or should it just be focused on whatever the major challenge might be for our two countries, no matter where it might be in the globe?
Well, ideally, we would want to see the United States deeply and absolutely engaged in the Asia-Pacific. I mean, this is our neighbourhood. This is where we live. This is where we want to work with the United States as forces for good in our region. But the United States is so much in demand. And tragically, in the Middle East, its attention is focused on an appalling situation that has emerged in Syria and Iraq and Libya and, let's face it, Yemen, Afghanistan. It's a pretty tough neighbourhood. And of course, we would rather the United States not be engaged in such devastating conflicts as are occurring, because we wouldn't want them to occur in the first place. So in an ideal world, of course, we would want the United States to be positively engaging in our part of the world. We have plenty of challenges. The South Pacific, amongst some of the poorest developing nations on earth, and we want to work closely with the United States to ensure prosperity and security in the Pacific. Throughout Asia, we want to be part of the US engagement in our part of the world, because the United States has shown since the Second World War that it is a positive force for good in providing the kind of security guarantee that allows countries to get on and develop their economies and become first world countries. So that's the ideal. I'm afraid that when the United States is engaged in the Middle East in recent times, it's to solve conflicts, that intractable differences that no one else can solve.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes, right here.
Dan Hartnett, Center for Naval Analyses. I have a question regarding the marine rotational force Darwin, if you will, ma'am. And is the idea that, is there appetite in Australia, do you think, going forward for expanding that level of cooperation beyond either number of forces projected to be there 2,500, or for additional similar type rotational forces in other parts of Australia, possibly in the future?
Well, we certainly welcome the US Marines to Darwin. They are deeply appreciated. They boost our economy. They add to our defence capabilities, the joint exercises that we carry out. We think that having the US Defence Force in Darwin is a great outcome for the region. As I mentioned earlier, we are on the rim of fire. Our area is one of the most prone to natural disasters in the world, and having a military force of the capability and capacity of the United States in the region fills countries with great confidence that we can have a military deployment to assist in natural disasters in a very timely fashion. The recent cyclones in Vanuatu, in Philippines and the like, indicates how important it is to have that kind of timely deployment. So from that perspective, I think that Darwin, Northern Territory, would certainly welcome it. As to having other US troops stationed around the country, we've always welcomed the US Navy into Fremantle Harbour. In fact, we compete with other cities around Australia to have your aircraft carriers come into our waters. But whether or not the US would see a logistical need to be stationed elsewhere is a matter for them. I mean, I'm from Perth, Western Australia. I think it's the centre of the universe, but apparently it's a long way from anywhere else. So whether or not troops stationed in Perth would be logistically sensible is a matter for our military advisors. But most certainly, as long as we make it plain to our region what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that the US presence is a positive for the region, then I don't see why it shouldn't continue.
Great. I'd like to invite Dr. Elsa Wainwright up to the stage from the United States Study Center to make a few closing remarks. Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Foreign Minister Julie Bishop for her remarks today, for reminding us of the significant security challenges which exist in the Indo-Pacific region. But while they're there, we should also not forget the extraordinary economic opportunities in the region, which are providing opportunities for so many, the economic growth which is providing opportunities for so many, but is also, as you say, in part driving up the regional military spending. Thank you also for providing important historical context to us and describing ways in which regional tensions can be partly offset, including through deeper economic integration, and also how capable militaries can have stabilising effects. I found that point very interesting. And you also set out so clearly, Foreign Minister, the unique regional perspective that Australia can bring, not only our deep regional expertise, but our growing regional linkages and how important these are for helping to manage regional tensions. So we're so pleased that you made it up on the train from New York today. Thank you for coming, and all the best for the rest of your schedule in Washington. Can I also, yes, thank you. Can I also thank Michelle Flournoy, the Honourable Michelle Flournoy, the co-founder and CEO of the Centre for a New American Security, for taking us on such a wide-ranging and rich conversation with the Foreign Minister. Thank you very much. And thank you to Patrick and Hannah and Jasmine and your colleagues at CNAS for all the hard work you've done setting up today, a task which was clearly complicated by the weather and the fact that schools and public buildings and government offices are still closed. So we're very grateful for that. Thank you to the US Study Centre colleagues, Andrew and Catherine, for the hard work today. And I'd like to thank all of you for braving the conditions and making it in here. I think the fact that so many of you are here not only attests to the fact you all wanted to hear the excellent address that the Foreign Minister gave us today, but also it really attests to the strength and the enduring importance of the US-Australia alliance. And lastly, can I announce that the first US Study Centre Alliance Fellowship has been awarded to CNAS President Richard Fontaine. And Richard will be spending 2.5 months in Australia later this year working on alliance issues. And I know that my Sydney-based colleagues at the US Study Centre are looking forward to welcoming him and his family to Australia. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and please join me again in thanking the Foreign Minister.